It was a quiet night in the small town of Millfield. The streets were deserted, and the only sound was the faint hum of streetlights. But as the night wore on, a figure emerged from the shadows, moving slowly and deliberately down the deserted streets. The figure was clad in a long, black coat, and a hood concealed his face in darkness. He moved with an eerie grace, his steps silent as he stalked through the deserted town. No one knew who he was, or what he wanted, but everyone knew to stay away from him. The maniac had a reputation for violence, and no one wanted to be his next victim. The maniac had been terrorizing the town for months, but no one had been able to catch him. The police had mounted patrols, set up checkpoints, and even brought in outside help, but the maniac always seemed to slip through their grasp. He left no clues, no fingerprints, no evidence, nothing that could be used to track him down. The town was on edge, and everyone was living in fear. They locked their doors at night, avoided going out after dark, and whispered about the maniac in hushed tones. But even with all their precautions, no one was safe. The first victim was a young woman, a local teacher who had been walking home from a friend's house late at night. Her body was found the next morning, her throat slashed and her body left in a ditch by the side of the road. The police had no leads, and the town was plunged into a state of panic. The second victim was a local businessman, a well-known figure in the community. His body was found in his office, stabbed repeatedly and left to bleed out on the floor. The maniac had left a message scrawled on the wall in blood, a cryptic message that no one could decipher. The third victim was a teenage girl, a high school student who had been walking home from a party. Her body was found in a park, her face twisted in a look of horror. The maniac had left no clues, no message, nothing to indicate why he had chosen her as his next victim. The town was in chaos, and no one knew what to do. The police were working around the clock, but they seemed no closer to catching the maniac than they had been when the murders had first started. The residents of Millfield were desperate for a solution, but no one knew where to turn. And then, one day, a stranger arrived in town. He was a tall, imposing figure, with a sharp, angular face and piercing blue eyes. He wore a long, black coat, and he moved with a grace that reminded the townspeople of the maniac. But there was something about him, something that set him apart from the other figure that had been terrorizing their town. The stranger walked into the sheriff's office and introduced himself as Detective Alex Finch. He claimed to be an expert in tracking down serial killers, and he offered to help the police catch the maniac. The sheriff was skeptical, but he was willing to try anything. He agreed to let Detective Finch assist with the investigation, and he assigned a team of officers to work with him. For weeks, Detective Finch worked tirelessly, poring over evidence, analyzing crime scenes, and interviewing witnesses. He was methodical, precise, and focused, and he seemed to have a sixth sense when it came to tracking down killers. The town was divided in its opinion of Detective Finch. Some saw him as a hero, a savior who had come to save them from the maniac. Others were suspicious of him, wondering why he had shown up in their town out of the blue. And then, one night, there was a breakthrough. A witness had come forward, claiming to have seen a figure lurking in the shadows near the scene of one of the murders. Detective Finch pored over the witness's statement, and he noticed something that no one else had seen, a small detail that could crack the case wide open. He gathered the police officers, and they went out into the night, scouring the town for any sign of the maniac. They searched alleyways and abandoned buildings, and they checked every dark corner and shadowy nook. And then, in the early hours of the morning, they found him. The maniac was holed up in an abandoned factory on the outskirts of town, his face twisted in a sneer as he brandished a bloody knife. The police officers drew their weapons, but the maniac was ready for them. He lunged forward, and a violent struggle broke out. The maniac was fast and vicious, and it took all of the officers' combined efforts to subdue him. But finally, after what seemed like hours, they had him in custody. They brought him to the station, and the town breathed a collective sigh of relief. The reign of terror was finally over. The next day, the residents of Millfield woke up to a new reality. The maniac was in jail, and they could finally go about their lives without looking over their shoulders. They went back to work, to school, and to their daily routines, grateful for the peace of mind that had eluded them for so long. But for Detective Finch, the case was far from over. He knew that there was more to the maniac's story, and he was determined to uncover the truth. He spent long hours poring over police reports, studying the maniac's background, and piecing together the puzzle of his life. And finally, after months of investigation, Detective Finch uncovered a shocking truth. The maniac had not acted alone, he had been part of a larger network of criminals, a shadowy organization that operated in secret, preying on innocent victims across the country. Detective Finch worked tirelessly to bring the other members of the organization to justice, and his efforts paid off. One by one, the members of the organization were brought to trial, and they were all convicted of their crimes. And finally, Millfield could breathe a sigh of relief. The maniac was in jail, and the shadowy organization that had haunted their town was gone for good. The residents of Millfield went back to their lives, grateful for the courage and determination of Detective Finch, who had risked everything to keep them safe.